December 7, 1941. 7:48 a.m. Pearl Harbor, territory of Hawaii. The morning is deceptively calm. Destroyer USS Ward is on routine patrol in the waters southwest of the naval base, her crew moving through the standard motions of a peacetime Sunday. Quartermaster William Outerbridge stands on the bridge, coffee warming his hands, watching the gentle swell of the Pacific. The sky is clear. The air is warm. Everything is exactly as it should be on a quiet Hawaiian morning. Then, at 3,500 yards, something breaks the surface. A small, dark shape. Submarine. Enemy submarine. General quarters. Outerbridge's voice cuts through the radio. The Ward lurches into action. This is not a drill. This is the moment, though no one aboard knows it yet, that will expose one of the war's most consequential technological gaps, a chasm between two navies that will determine the fate of the Pacific for the next 4 years. The American sailors manning the guns know what radar is. They've trained with it. They've studied the screens, watched the green phosphorescent glow painting targets out of the darkness, seen blips appear where human eyes see only water and sky. Radar. Detection apparatus. A marvel of modern warfare that had been refined in Europe and rushed to the Pacific as tensions with Japan escalated. The USS Ward herself carried this technology. So did cruisers and destroyers throughout the fleet. But in Tokyo, in the planning rooms of the Imperial Japanese Navy, a critical assumption held firm: the Americans could not possibly possess radar systems of any operational significance. The Japanese had attempted to develop radar technology themselves. The results had been primitive, unreliable, expensive. If the Japanese, with all their technological prowess, their naval tradition, their industrial capacity, could barely manage to produce functional radar systems, then surely the Americans, focused on other weapons, could not have achieved what seemed nearly impossible. This assumption would cost Japan the war. The Ward fires. 300 rounds roar from her 5-inch guns. The submarine vanishes. It's 6:45 a.m. Hawaii time. In a few minutes, the first wave of Japanese aircraft will begin their descent toward Battleship Row. The sailors aboard the Ward, watching their radar screens, seeing the blips appear and disappear with mechanical precision, have no idea that they've just fired the opening shot of a war that will be decided, in part, by technology that sits on the bridge beside them, technology that the enemy has fatally underestimated. 2 years earlier. Somewhere over the English Channel. The Battle of Britain is being fought in the skies above southern England, and the RAF is winning, not through superior pilot training alone, not through courage or desperation, but through something the Germans cannot see. Something invisible. In 1939 and 1940, as war consumed Europe, British scientists at Bawdsey Manor had been developing an experimental technology called radio detection and ranging, radar. Early systems were crude. Giant wooden towers bristling with antennas dotted the English coastline. But they worked. When German bombers approached, the blips appeared on phosphorescent screens. Fighters were vectored to intercept. Squadrons knew where to go before they could see anything. The Germans had no equivalent. German intelligence had heard rumors. There were whispers of some kind of detection system. But the whispers were vague, unconfirmed. When captured British pilots were interrogated, they spoke of radar almost casually, so casually that German officers assumed it was a minor technological curiosity, nothing that would fundamentally alter the nature of air combat. By the time the Germans realized their mistake, the Battle of Britain was lost. The British, having kept radar secret and proven its effectiveness, became increasingly protective of the technology. They shared it, carefully, sparingly, with their American allies. American naval officers who visited Britain in 1940 and 1941 witnessed radar in action. They saw how a radar-equipped destroyer could track targets far beyond visual range. They understood immediately that this was not just an advantage, this was potentially war-winning. American industry, already mobilizing for possible conflict, began producing radar systems. The SCR-270 air search radar. The CXAM ship search radar. The Mark 8 fire control radar. By late 1941, American destroyers and cruisers were being equipped with these systems. The USS Ward received her radar installation as tensions with Japan escalated. So did the USS California, the USS Nevada, the USS Pennsylvania. They were distributed throughout the Pacific Fleet. American sailors trained on the equipment. They learned to read the screens, to interpret the signals, to understand that a green blip on a black screen could mean the difference between victory and annihilation. They learned to trust technology in a way that previous generations of sailors never had to. They had seen what radar could do. The Japanese Navy, meanwhile, had seen something different. Tokyo. Naval Headquarters. 1940 to 1941. Japanese naval officers understand that radar exists. They have heard the rumors. Some have even seen preliminary designs captured or smuggled from occupied territories. But understanding that something exists is not the same as appreciating its operational significance. The Japanese attempt to develop their own radar systems begins in 1940. Research teams work on various prototypes. The results are disappointing. The equipment is bulky. The screens are difficult to read. The reliability is poor. Japanese engineers, working with the technological foundation available to them, struggle to produce systems that function consistently in the humid, salt-laden environment of naval operations. More critically, the Japanese Navy's institutional culture works against radar adoption. The tradition of Japanese naval warfare, refined through centuries of maritime conflict, emphasizes visual observation, maneuver, and the personal skill of individual officers. Young officers are trained to scan the horizon with their own eyes. They practice identification by sight. The idea that a machine should tell a commander where the enemy is strikes many senior officers as contrary to the very essence of naval combat. There is also a deeper assumption embedded in Japanese strategic thinking, that American industrial capacity, while significant, could not possibly produce advanced military technology at scale. Japan itself had achieved technological marvels through exceptional engineering and craftsmanship. But this came at a cost. Japanese production was expensive. It was slow. If the Japanese could barely produce functional radar systems in limited quantities, then surely the Americans, focused on mass production, on quantity over quality, could not have achieved what seemed to require exceptional technical skill. This assumption contains a fundamental misunderstanding of American industry. American manufacturers had learned, through decades of mass production, to produce complex technology reliably and at scale. What took Japanese craftsmen months to build by hand, American assembly lines could produce in days. The radar systems arriving on American destroyers in 1941 were not crude prototypes. They were mature, reliable systems. But Japanese intelligence did not grasp this. There is one more factor: the success of Japanese military technology up to this point. The Zero fighter has dominated the skies over China. Japanese destroyers have been superior to those of any other navy. Japanese naval doctrine, developed through war games and theoretical study, has been proven effective. Why should senior officers believe that some invisible detection system would fundamentally change the nature of naval combat? The answer arrives on December 7, 1941. But by then, it is too late to change course. December 7, 1941. The attack on Pearl Harbor is already underway. At 7:02 a.m., operators on the radar station at Opana Point, on the northern tip of Oahu, detect a massive blip on their screen. Dozens of targets. Hundreds, perhaps. The signal is so large that one operator, George Elliott, initially assumes the equipment is malfunctioning. But it's not. Somewhere out over the ocean, moving toward the island, is the first wave of Japanese aircraft. The operators call the information center. They report the contact. There is confusion. A B-17 is expected from the mainland that morning. Officers wonder if this is the B-17. By the time clarity emerges, the aircraft are minutes away. By 8 a.m., the attack is in full force. Battleship Row erupts in flames. The USS Arizona is destroyed, her crew of over 1,100 men entombed in her hull. The USS Oklahoma capsizes. The USS West Virginia and California are sunk. Destroyers, cruisers, and cruisers explode and burn. The radar operators watch the signals multiply and fade as American aircraft are destroyed or scramble to launch. They track the Japanese formations. They provide information to fighters attempting to intercept. But there are too many Japanese aircraft, and too few American fighters. What the radar operators do not know, what no American sailor at Pearl Harbor could possibly know in that moment of chaos, is that this attack is the result of Japanese confidence that they can achieve total surprise. The Japanese Navy planned this operation with the assumption that they would achieve tactical surprise through sheer audacity. No American would expect an attack at Pearl Harbor. No American would be looking. The Japanese Navy did not account for radar. There is a profound irony buried in the smoking ruins of Pearl Harbor. The very technology that the Japanese Navy had dismissed as insignificant had been operating that morning. American radar had detected the Japanese fleet. American radar had warned of the incoming attack. And yet, despite this warning, the attack succeeded. Surprise was achieved not because radar failed, but because the officers who received the radar information did not fully understand its implications. By the time the significance was grasped, it was too late. But this is a lesson that will be learned and relearned over the coming years. The Japanese Navy, having failed to anticipate American radar in peacetime, will spend the rest of the war playing catch-up to a technology they fundamentally misunderstood. The first test comes just 6 months later. May 1942. The Coral Sea, northeast of Australia. The Battle of the Coral Sea is not like previous naval battles. It is not like Jutland in 1916, where massive battleships traded fire across visible distances. It is not like earlier engagements in the Pacific, where navies maneuvered to bring their guns to bear. In the Coral Sea, the opposing fleets never see each other. The ships remain beyond the horizon, separated by 100 miles of open water. Instead, the battle is fought by aircraft. Dive bombers and torpedo bombers launched from carriers, guided by information provided by a technology that one side understands and the other side still does not fully appreciate. The USS Yorktown and USS Lexington are equipped with radar. When Japanese aircraft approach, American radar operators see them coming. The information is transmitted to fighter direction officers, who vector American F-4F Wildcats to intercept. American pilots know, before they see the Japanese aircraft, where they are coming from and approximately how many there are. The Japanese aircraft approach without knowing they have been detected. They rely on visual scouting, on the reports of other aircraft, on the experience and judgment of their pilots. They are skilled pilots. Many of them have combat experience from the war in China. But skill and experience cannot overcome the disadvantage of fighting blind. American fighters, positioned by radar guidance, intercept the Japanese formations. The Wildcats are inferior aircraft compared to the Japanese Zero. They are slower. They are less maneuverable. But they are in the right place at the right time, and that advantage, provided by radar, is decisive. The Japanese lose more aircraft than the Americans. The Lexington is sunk by Japanese aircraft that do manage to penetrate the American defense. The Yorktown is damaged. But the Japanese lose their light carrier Shoho and suffer damage to the Shokaku. More importantly, they lose trained pilots. These pilots cannot easily be replaced. The battle is tactically inconclusive. Both sides claim victory. But strategically, something profound has shifted. American commanders, watching the battle unfold through the lens of radar information, begin to understand that the technology is more than a novelty. It is a force multiplier. It changes the calculus of naval warfare. Japanese commanders, reviewing the reports from pilots and senior officers, draw a different conclusion. The Coral Sea is a setback, certainly. But it is not a revelation. The Japanese Navy still possesses qualitative advantages. Their pilots are better trained. Their tactics are superior. They will do better next time. They will get the opportunity to test this theory very soon. And they will discover, too late, just how wrong their assumptions have been. June 4, 1942. 0400 hours. The waters northeast of Midway Atoll. Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto, commander of the combined fleet of the Imperial Japanese Navy, is aboard the battleship Yamato, flagship of the Japanese fleet. Around him, organized in 4 carrier task forces, is the most powerful concentration of naval firepower the world has ever seen. 4 fleet carriers, the Kaga, Akagi, Soryu, and Hiryu. These are the same carriers that attacked Pearl Harbor 6 months ago. With them are battleships, cruisers, and destroyers. Yamamoto believes this fleet is invincible. The American fleet is smaller. The USS Enterprise, the USS Hornet, and the USS Yorktown, damaged at the Coral Sea but repaired in an astonishing 48 hours. American pilots are less experienced than their Japanese counterparts. American aircraft are inferior to the Zero. By every measure of classical naval doctrine, the Americans should lose this battle decisively. But the Americans have something the Japanese do not: radar. At dawn, American radar operators aboard the Task Force 16 flagship USS Enterprise detect the Japanese carriers at a range of over 100 miles. The information is relayed immediately. American aircraft are launched. Torpedo bombers and dive bombers climb into the sky, guided by information that comes not from visual sighting or radio reports from scouts, but from the mechanical eye of radar. The Japanese, meanwhile, are launching their own aircraft. But they are operating with incomplete information. Their scout planes have found the American fleet, yes, but there is confusion about the exact position and composition. By the time the Japanese attack coordinators understand the full picture, it is too late. American dive bombers, positioned by radar-informed calculations, arrive over the Japanese carriers as their decks are filled with refueling and rearming aircraft. The Japanese carriers are vulnerable. They are caught in a moment of confusion and transition. The dive bombers descend. The first bomb strikes the Kaga. Explosions ripple across her deck. The carrier is transformed into a burning wreck. Minutes later, the Akagi is hit. Then the Soryu. All three carriers are mortally wounded within moments. The Hiryu, the last Japanese fleet carrier, manages to launch aircraft before she is located and attacked by American dive bombers. She too is set ablaze. By noon on June 4, 1942, four Japanese fleet carriers are sinking. The balance of naval power in the Pacific has shifted, perhaps irreversibly. The Japanese Navy has lost not just ships, but the trained pilots who flew from those ships. Those pilots, unlike American pilots, cannot easily be replaced. In Tokyo, in the planning rooms where assumptions about American industrial capacity and technological capability had been made, the news arrives like a thunderbolt. The fleet that was supposed to be invincible has been destroyed. The strategy that was supposed to be infallible has failed. Japanese commanders begin, for the first time, to grasp the true significance of radar. American commanders, watching the battle unfold with precise information provided by their radar systems, understand now that this technology has changed warfare fundamentally. But the Japanese Navy, despite this catastrophic lesson, is slow to act. Production of Japanese radar systems accelerates, yes. But the technology is still primitive compared to American systems. More crucially, the institutional culture that rejected radar before the war does not change quickly. Senior officers, their pride wounded by defeat, struggle to accept that American technology, mass-produced, seemingly crude, has proven superior to the craftsmanship and tradition of the Imperial Navy. The irony that will haunt the Japanese Navy for the rest of the war is now clear. They dismissed radar as insignificant in peacetime. They refused to invest fully in its development. And by the time they understood its importance, American industry had already achieved an insurmountable lead. The years that follow Midway are years of relentless American advance and steady Japanese retreat. Island by island, the Americans move west across the Pacific. Guadalcanal, the Gilbert Islands, the Marshall Islands, the Mariana Islands. Each campaign reinforces the same lesson: radar-equipped American ships and radar-guided American aircraft have advantages that Japanese naval forces, still relying primarily on visual observation and traditional tactics, cannot overcome. The Japanese Navy adapts. New radar systems are developed. The Type 21 radar appears on Japanese ships in 1943 and 1944. But these systems are inferior to their American counterparts. They require specialized training to operate. They break down frequently. And there are never enough of them. Japanese industrial capacity, already strained by the demands of multi-front warfare, cannot produce radar systems at the scale required to equip the entire fleet. More fundamentally, the institutional acceptance of radar technology comes too late. By the time Japanese commanders fully embrace radar as essential to modern naval warfare, American commanders have already integrated radar into every aspect of their operational doctrine. American fire control systems are built around radar. American air defense tactics depend on radar guidance. American task force maneuvers are planned with radar capabilities in mind. The contrast becomes starkly visible in 1943 and 1944, during the brutal night battles in the Slot, the waters between the Solomon Islands, where Japanese and American naval forces clash repeatedly in darkness. American destroyers, equipped with superior radar systems and trained to use them, inflict devastating losses on Japanese surface forces that still rely on superior night vision training and traditional gunnery doctrine. At the Battle of Tassafaranga in November 1942, American cruisers and destroyers equipped with radar engage a Japanese destroyer flotilla. The Americans have superior firepower and information. The Japanese have superior tactical skill and years of training in night combat. But radar proves decisive. The Americans detect the Japanese force at extreme range, open fire, and inflict heavy casualties before the Japanese can even identify their opponent visually. American sailors, standing at their gun mounts and radar screens, watching phosphorescent blips move across black screens, begin to develop an almost mystical faith in their technology. They can see in the dark. They can strike targets beyond the horizon. They are equipped with a weapon that their enemy does not fully understand and cannot adequately counter. Japanese sailors, by contrast, find themselves fighting an enemy they cannot see, attacked by forces that appear without warning, guided by instruments they do not possess. The psychological toll is immense. Some Japanese officers begin to suspect, correctly, that the Americans possess a technological advantage that Japanese courage and training cannot overcome. In Tokyo, the recognition finally arrives: radar is not a supplementary tool. It is fundamental to modern naval warfare. But by 1943 and 1944, the recognition comes at a time when Japanese shipyards are already overwhelmed with damage control, when Japanese pilots are dying faster than replacements can be trained, when Japanese industrial capacity is being consumed by the demands of a two-front war. The advantage that American radar provided in 1941, when the technology was new and the Japanese Navy's confidence was high, has compounded exponentially. What began as a technological edge has become a chasm that cannot be crossed. An American destroyer captain, standing on the bridge of his ship in the darkness, knows something that no Japanese naval officer can know with the same certainty: exactly where the enemy is, at what range, in what formation, and how many there are. This knowledge comes not from experience, not from intuition, not from centuries of maritime tradition. It comes from a machine. From radar. The American captain can make decisions based on perfect information. He can maneuver his ship to maintain advantage. He can time his attack to achieve maximum effect. He can do all of this while the enemy is still invisible, still operating on incomplete information, still relying on methods that were state-of-the-art in 1900. An American fighter pilot, climbing toward an intercept, knows he is being guided by men on radar screens below him. He trusts this guidance. He knows, from repeated experience, that the radar operators are accurate. He arrives at the intercept point and finds the enemy. This happens again and again. The system works. The radar operators are invisible, but they are directing the battle as surely as any admiral. A Japanese fighter pilot, by contrast, is fighting blind. He searches the sky. He relies on reports from other aircraft. He maneuvers based on instinct and training. When American fighters appear, they appear suddenly, positioned to advantage. The Japanese pilot does not understand why. He does not have the information to understand. All he knows is that he is being hunted by an enemy that can see him when he cannot see them. The psychological impact of this asymmetry cannot be overstated. Japanese pilots, among the most skilled and experienced in the world, find themselves outmaneuvered by American pilots with less experience. Japanese naval officers, educated in the finest traditions of naval warfare, find their tactics ineffective against an enemy that operates with superior information. The confidence that sustained the Japanese Navy through 1941 and 1942 corrodes. Experienced officers begin to suspect that the war is already lost. In intelligence reports sent back to Tokyo, Japanese commanders describe American tactics that seem inexplicable. How do American fighters intercept Japanese formations with such precision? How do American task forces maneuver as if they know where Japanese ships are? How do American guns find targets in darkness or fog? Some officers theorize about American spies. Others suspect advanced optical equipment. A few, having captured or examined radar equipment abandoned on isolated islands, begin to understand the true answer. But by then, the damage is done. The institutional belief in Japanese superiority has been shattered. The confidence in the righteousness of the war has eroded. The knowledge that American industrial capacity, combined with technological superiority, has created an advantage that cannot be overcome settles into the consciousness of Japan's senior military leadership like a weight. In the aftermath of Midway, in the months and years that follow, American sailors with radar screens before them and Japanese sailors relying on traditional methods represent two different eras of warfare. The Japanese Navy is fighting the Second World War as if it were still the First. The American Navy has stepped into the future. The Japanese Navy dismissed radar in peacetime. They paid the price in wartime. And that price, measured in lost ships, lost battles, and lost empire, becomes the final verdict on the technological blind spot that cost them victory in the Pacific. Japan has surrendered. The atomic bombs have fallen on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. But long before the mushroom clouds rose over those cities, the outcome of the Pacific War had been decided. It was decided at Midway in June 1942, when American radar-guided aircraft caught Japanese carriers unprepared. It was decided in the months and years that followed, as American radar-equipped ships and aircraft systematically dismantled Japanese naval power. It was decided in the darkness of 100 night engagements in the slot, where American sailors could see in the dark and Japanese sailors could not. American naval officers, debriefing captured Japanese commanders, asked them directly, "Did you know about American radar?" The answer that came back, over and over, was some variation of the same truth: "We knew such a thing existed. We did not believe it was as effective as it proved to be. We did not invest in it the way we should have. By the time we understood its importance, it was too late." In post-war analysis, American strategists calculated that radar, more than any other single technological factor, had tilted the balance of the Pacific War in America's favor. Radar had allowed American forces, often numerically inferior in the early stages of the war, to fight with superior information. Radar had enabled American air defense to be more effective than Japanese air defense. Radar had guided American aircraft to targets with precision that Japanese pilots, fighting blind, could never achieve. The British scientists who had developed radar at Bawdsey Manor in 1939 and 1940 had given the world a new kind of warfare. The Americans, grasping its significance, had invested in its development and production with characteristic industrial thoroughness. The Japanese, dismissing it as a minor technical curiosity, had made a strategic error from which they could never recover. In the decades that followed, radar became central to naval doctrine. Every warship built after 1945 was designed around radar capabilities. Fighter aircraft were equipped with radar. Entire air defense systems were built on radar foundations. The technology that Japan had underestimated became the foundation of modern warfare. But the deeper lesson, the one that echoes beyond the specific technology, concerns the dangers of institutional arrogance and technological complacency. The Japanese Navy was confident in 1941. Confident in the superiority of their ships, their pilots, their tactics, their tradition. They looked at American development of radar and saw a crude attempt at something the Japanese could barely achieve. They did not ask themselves whether Americans might have solved the problem in ways the Japanese had not. They did not consider that mass production might create capabilities that Japanese craftsmanship could not match. The cost of that arrogance was measured in sunken ships, in lost battles, in an empire that crumbled into defeat. Section 10, The Sailors Who Knew. On the bridge of the USS Ward, on December 7, 1941, an American quartermaster named William Outerbridge fired the first shot of the Pacific War at a Japanese submarine. He had radar. The Japanese submarine had only its periscope, its instruments, its captain's experience. Years later, after the war, Outerbridge reflected on that moment. He did not know, standing on that bridge with radar screens glowing before him, that this technology would define the war to come. He did not know that the simple fact of being able to see what was invisible to the enemy would compound, multiply, and ultimately determine the fate of nations. But the sailors who stood at radar screens throughout the Pacific War knew something profound. Even if they could not fully articulate it, they were fighting a different kind of war than the one their enemy was fighting. They were equipped not just with weapons, but with a fundamentally different way of perceiving the battlefield. They could see in the dark. They could strike targets beyond the horizon. They could intercept enemies they had never seen with their own eyes. The Japanese sailors, by contrast, fought with courage and skill and the knowledge that they were being hunted by an enemy they could not see. That asymmetry, that fundamental difference in information and capability, was the difference between victory and defeat. When the war ended, American sailors emerged from the Pacific with radar screens burned into their memory. They had stared at those glowing phosphorescent blips, watched them move across black screens, trusted the information that machines provided. They had learned, in the most consequential way possible, that technology matters. That information matters. That the ability to see the enemy before the enemy can see you is not a minor advantage, it is everything. The Japanese Navy learned the same lesson, but too late. They had dismissed radar as insignificant in 1941. They had refused to invest in it adequately. They had assumed that American industry could not match their technological prowess. And they had paid for those assumptions with their fleet, with their empire, with the lives of hundreds of thousands of men. The irony that no Japanese commander could escape, in the years after the war, was this: the technology they had dismissed as a minor curiosity had changed everything. The blind spot that they had refused to acknowledge had blinded them to the future. And by the time they could see clearly, the war was already lost. American sailors, watching radar screens in the darkness, had seen what was coming. The Japanese Navy, relying on tradition and confidence and the certainty of their own superiority, had not. That difference, between seeing and not seeing, between information and ignorance, between understanding the future and clinging to the past, is the true story of radar in the Pacific War. It is the story of how a technology that one side understood and the other side dismissed changed the course of history. It is the story of how American sailors, standing at radar screens, could not believe that the Japanese Navy did not know what they knew. And it remained, to the end, a mystery to Japanese commanders: how did the Americans see in the dark?